I'll send this to you. Okay.
It's perfect. Yeah.
Great. Well, Vale, thank you very much for coming to join us on Global Thoughts. We're thrilled to have you here, and I really look forward to having you share your insight, your experience, your views on the current Summit of the Americas, which is being hosted by the United States in Los Angeles. And I just really want to see what you have to think and what Argentina's perspective is on this. So thank you again very much. We know about the absence of Cuba, Mexico, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. And then certainly I hope you can talk a little bit about the Argentinian view and how Latin America really views the Biden administration. So without further ado, I turn this over to you.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here today. It's really a pleasure, and I think it's a great opportunity to start a conversation, not just about the summit, but about more complicated issues that make up this relationship between the United States and Latin America. I may or may not agree with some of the statements that I prepared for today. But my main goal was sort of to give you a glimpse of ideas and discussions that we have had with some of my colleagues all across the political spectrum about this crisis that sort of unfolded regarding the Summit of the Americas. I talk a lot, so you can interrupt me whenever you want to. So the first thing that I wanted to mention was that before Biden's inauguration as president of the United States, the big question in the region was if we were going to be able to talk about a new relationship with Latin America, or how important was the region for the United States, especially if the new administration was going to bring significant change in the US policy towards Latin America, because the previous 4 years had been difficult between the parties. So at the time, sort of 2 years ago, and at the risk of sounding decisive, we stated that the short answer was no, that the anticipated change in rhetoric or tone or style was not necessarily an indication of substantial modifications in the topics of a foreign policy agenda, in which Latin America was not necessarily a priority. And a journalist, a very well-known journalist of foreign affairs in Argentina, which also happens to be one of my closest friends, she wrote an article recently in which she stated the following, and I'm going to quote her. She said, "It is not new that the region is not a priority for Biden. It has not been for almost 2 decades. In fact, the last important initiative in which Washington integrally thought about the region was the ALCA, which is the Free Trade Area of the Americas Agreement, ironically buried in a Summit of the Americas back in 2005 in Mar del Plata," which goes to show that in the last 20 years, the relationship has been complicated, because the United States has an agenda that not necessarily fits with the agenda that the region has in terms of the economy, migration, bilateral relations, even the relationship of the region with the states and of each country, because this situation that the United States thinks of Latin America as a whole, and each country has its own individuality and interests and goals, has been something that has complicated the relationship between these two parties. Having said that, there are issues that are a little bit more important for the states, like its relationship with Cuba, Venezuela, Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, the so-called northern triangle of Central America, which is El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, and then like the rest of the region. We also anticipated more continuities than ruptures, but we were hopeful about what was going to happen towards Cuba, especially because Biden had explicitly mentioned that he was going to stop whatever was the Trump administration was doing because it was not working. And given the fact that he was a member of the Obama administration, which even, not only opened the door for a new Washington-Havana relation, but the Obama administration actually invited Cuba to the 2015 Summit of the Americas in Panama. So all of this and what happened for this summit was very, very surprising for the region, because it was the exact opposite of what Biden announced he was going to do. So that was sort of the first thing, and I think it kind of explains the reaction of the region, that it was so negative. And I think that the other thing was that the United States was not expecting the reaction from Latin America. I think they were kind of expecting that they were going to follow in line and condemn everything that is happening in Nicaragua and Cuba and Venezuela, and not this. So that is something that I feel like it also needs to be explained, like what is happening between these two parties. Another thing that I wanted sort of to highlight was that we are still feeling the aftermath of what happened in the 2018 summit, in which, the Trump administration announced a few days before the summit that Trump was not going to go. He was going to skip the meeting. I think he said that he needed to supervise the situation in Syria and sort of everything that was going on globally, and sent Mike Pence. And that was felt as a snub to the region, really, which, sort of added, that snub sort of added to the list of, let's call them unfortunate comments about Latin America and Latin American migrants. So I feel like we still are seeing the impact of that political decision. And I don't think that the Biden administration took that into account. And as someone recently told me, snubbing is a two-way street. So now it's like, okay, you did that to us, now we are going to do that to you because you gave us a reason for that. So that is sort of a way to sort of empower the region in a way, and trying to explain to the Biden administration that we are a valid partner, but this is a dialogue and not like a monologue, which is something that goes to show, and this is something that I've been saying for a while now, that we need to realize that the relationship between the United States and Latin America changed, but also that the relationship between Latin America and the United States changed. And that is something that the United States needs to start paying more attention to in order to really break this disconnect that it seems to be going on right now. So I don't know if you want to interrupt me. Like I said, I speak so much.
You're fine. I think I was just going to add to that. The United States has not realized that Latin America's position on Cuba has changed. Back in the 1960s, the United States had full support from the Caribbean and Latin America, the Organization of the American States, to really ignore and alienate Cuba. And I think it was in the 1980s under Reagan that they had the Caribbean Basin Initiative, I think, CBI, where they tried to get all the other islands in the Caribbean. They basically said, we will help subsidize you, we'll give you some money, but you have to completely isolate Cuba. Don't do anything with Cuba. Those days are gone now, and Cuba has a lot more support. And I wonder if the United States even realizes this. I don't think they do.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that it feels like the United States is still sort of stuck in the Cold War rhetoric of how they relate to the region. But also there's another thing, which is the argument that they chose, about excluding these countries. It is true, like I've said, there's no doubt that these government actions are criticizable to a greater or lesser extent. However, many in Latin America and in South America, many wonder if the United States is today in a position to, I don't know if this expression translates, but throw the first stone. You know, I don't know if it translates, regarding, you know, commitments to democracy. The US in the last few years has had complaints of voter fraud, voter restriction laws and practices in the 50 states, not to mention the very controversial electoral college and the fact that you have presidents that don't have the majority of the vote of the people. The attempt to stop the transfer of presidential power on January 6, 2021, that is still being investigated, practices of political repression and the criminalization of social protest. And not just that, you know, but that is domestically, but in outside the borders, we have not had the best relationship regarding US interventionism in the region, coup attempts, and not just attempts in either Chile in the 70s or Honduras in 2009, Bolivia in 2019, and we are not talking about authoritarian governments. We're talking about governments that were democratically elected. So the fact that the US supports authoritarian governments all over the world, but they are capitalist governments. So that is basically the discussion. Is this about democracy really, or what are we talking about when we talk about democracy? So I feel like that was really, especially after what happened in Bolivia in 2019, that had the support of the Organization of American States. Were like, this is, yes, if we want to talk about democracy, fine, but you are not in a position to be the bigger man in this situation. And there's this other thing that I wanted to mention, the fact that it was a decision that was made, again, unilaterally. It was not a consensus with the region about excluding these three countries. So was this a democratic discussion about excluding, or how can we be democratic if we are excluding the countries that we want to suggest, you know, changes? And going back to the summit, another surprising thing was that the first signs of dissent sort of that arose in the area was pretty unlikely as well, which was the Caribbean. The countries of the Caribbean, the 14 members of CARICOM were the first countries that said that you know, they were not likely to attend if the United States didn't go back on its decision. Then it came Mexico, which was like the big one, and again, that no one really expected, and López Obrador really took a lead there in saying, if this is happening, we're not going. And I think it goes to show again that the United States needs to have a dialogue with the region and not, you know, telling us what to do or which direction our foreign policy has to go to. Then other countries in South America came, like Honduras, Bolivia, particularly Chile, and then even the Brazil of Jair Bolsonaro, which is, you know, it doesn't go to the left, it goes to the right. And they said, well, you know, this is a consensus, we are not going, even though it was like a political move that explains a lot what is going on internally with the rise of Lula da Silva again, and the fact that the Biden administration has criticized Brazil, the government of Bolsonaro. And with this position, they managed to arrange a bilateral meeting with Biden. So again, it kind of shows how issues that concern domestic policy and foreign policy are sort of intertwining, if that's even a word, in this response to the United States. But the reality is that we are in the summit now, and the majority of the countries said that their presidents were not going to go if the United States didn't go back on the invitation of these three countries. So I want to quote another colleague of mine that said that while the United States has been, again, trying to unilaterally set the agenda, in the context of this crisis of the Americas, Latin America found what it needed to express to the United States that the aspiration is a shared agenda and a shared dialogue, and discuss issues that we are worried about, and not just what the United States wants us to discuss. And I'm going to quote him. His name is Matias Bianchi. He's the director of Asuntos del Sur. And he wrote a piece for El País in which he says that this political crisis in the Americas hinders the necessary reconstitution of hemispheric articulation spaces. The pandemic exposed the weakness of the instances of dialogue and multilateral articulation. The result has been catastrophic. The continent with the most death from COVID-19, with the greatest socioeconomic impact and the greatest inequalities in the distribution of vaccines. This moment requires generations of meetings, exchanges, and discussions, especially in the difference. It is impossible to advance on agendas such as the fight against drug trafficking, migration, unregulated financial capitalism, or climate change without having all the Americas at the table. In the context of war, pandemics, and economic crisis, this is a luxury that we cannot afford. So, after discussing, the position of Latin America, which I think it was pretty clear after everything that the statements for every country came, and it was sort of like very clear that we want to have a shared discussion of topics. One of the questions that we were asking in Argentina was, what was the importance of the summit for the Biden administration? How could we explain this position that they decided to take? And particularly what it will mean to give in or not give in to the pressures from the region. If they decide to, to reverse the announcement and the invitations. And we believe that the answer is not on the foreign policy agenda, which hasn't changed not much in the last 20 years again, but what is happening domestically. And the first reason is the midterm elections. The Democratic Party not only runs the risk of losing the narrow majority it has in both chambers, especially in the Senate, and thereby sort of carrying any legislative agenda in the next 2 years, but also most governorships of the country are at stake. So we believe that this sort of explains why, after approaching Venezuela and Cuba, because we should not forget that the Biden administration announced, I think it was in February, I believe, that Biden sent one of his main advisors to the region, Juan Gonzalez, to Caracas to speak with Nicolás Maduro regarding energy issues. This was, in the context of the war in Ukraine and the increase in oil prices. And this was very important because it was the most meaningful approach between Venezuela and the United States in many, many years. And the other thing was that they announced, I think it was at the beginning of May, that the State Department announced flexibility measures towards Cuba. So after doing that, they don't invite these countries. So they announced a decision that goes in the opposite that direction. And we believe it's basically not to alienate the Latino vote for the midterms and not, feed the rhetoric of conservative leaders among the Latino community, such as Marco Rubio, and worse, I think even worse yet, the members of his own party, the Democratic Party. In this case, the senator, I think it's from New Jersey. Bob Menendez is from New Jersey, right? Yeah. So Menendez it's a figure that we don't know much about in Latin America, that we've been learning about him in the last few years, that he has, in this case, a very decisive vote in the Senate. He's a member of the Banking and Finance Commission, I believe. He's also in the Foreign Relations Commission. And I'm pretty sure he's a leading figure in the conservative Hispanic bloc in Washington, D.C. And we've been reading about his reaction to this approach to Venezuela and Cuba before the summit. That was very harsh. You know, he criticized the Biden administration a lot for the approach to Maduro and these measures regarding Cuba. And I read one news outlet that said that he managed to stop further progress in said initiatives by himself. So I think that that is the other reason, not to alienate his vote. The other thing is that the Biden administration is forced to put on the table an issue that also has consequences in the region, which is migration. But we have different approaches to migration. The reality is that people migrate for a reason. And that is that many Latin American countries, especially in Central America, are expelling population because of their domestic economic situations. And the only way to stop that is to improve the conditions domestically. And that requires agreements, negotiations, funds, money, and the United States have been cutting those funds. I know that the Biden administration sort of announced $4 billion for the region, but the question that we're asking is, where is that money going? And how is it being used, and how the policies are decided? Because money has been put into the region and nothing is really changing. Things are worsening. So the big question is, again, where is this money going? How they decide where these billions of dollars go? And that needs also to be discussed bilaterally, not just, you know, one party telling these countries where this money should go. Mexico has a big say in what is happening with migration, because the crisis at the border is not just on the US side, it's on the other side. And I feel Mexico is using this situation to have his voice heard. I don't know if you've heard about this, but in the last, I think it was last year, there was a Supreme Court decision that was basically trying to tell Mexico what to do with migrants at the border. And that was a big offense to the Mexican government, because it's like the US Supreme Court cannot tell us how we manage our situation at the border. So these things, again, the dialogue changed big time in the region. And the final aspect that I wanted to say two last things, and I promise I will shut up, is that there are two things that the State Department should take into account. First of all, like we were saying before, that the international order has changed and the regional order has changed. It's not the same as in the immediate post-Cold War years. And that would have avoided a few comments that we've heard. I'm gonna read her comments because this happened a few weeks ago. Kerry Hannan, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs, she said that countries that have threatened to skip the regional meetings should attend, or they will lose an opportunity to engage with the United States. And she also blamed the whole thing on Cuba. It was like going back to the 1970s again. And that was like basically a threat telling us, well, you're not going to have a relationship with the United States. And sometimes we're like, fine, we haven't been having that relationship in the past 6 years. So that was not very well received. The other thing is that the region is sort of leaning more progressive again, which is a big shift that the State Department needs to take into account. We are talking about, you know, Chile, Peru, Honduras, Argentina, Mexico, Colombia, potentially, if Gustavo Preto, I was going to say Prieto, but it's Preto, wins the election, and the anticipated return of Lula da Silva to Brazil. And these governments are more prone to regionalism, straighten bilateral relations, regional cooperation, and integration not mediated by the United States. And the final thing that I'm going to say is that one of the things is that, like I was saying before, the United States is the regional superpower, yes, but it's not. It's a non-hegemonic power at this point. And I think we've talked about this before. The threat of China the view of China as a threat is not unanimous. It might be a threat to the United States, but for us, it sort of turns into choosing between two evils and go with the lesser one. And China has become not just the second investor in Latin America, but the main investor in South America. They have gained not from Biden projects for electricity, technology, mining, cultural agreements, direct investments, and they are putting money into the region at a pace that the US government is not ready or prepared to invest. So the reality is that the view of China as a threat is not unanimous again. And in order to regain the initiative, it's like the US government needs to go farther than pressuring of political pressure or potential economic sanctions, because that is not how the conversation is gonna go anymore. So yeah, that is a few of the points that I wanted to make regarding the the Latin American position. For Argentina, we are in a more complicated situation because we have this ongoing and forever pending agreement with the International Monetary Fund that is always, part of the conversation of the positions that the Argentina can or cannot take on situations. And the president of Argentina, Alberto Fernandez, is the president of the CELAC right now, the pro tempore president. So he said that he was going to be the voice of the countries that were not invited to the summit, and that he's going to go, but he's going to go in protest. And then he's gonna meet President Biden in July. But I think there were, I think it was Maduro that said a few days ago that he needed to be the voice of Venezuela in the region. And there was another president, I don't remember who it was, I'm gonna apologize, but he said, we already said what we needed to say. We don't need a spokesperson. So that goes to show that even our position is very controversial in this topic, because it seems that we have two messages. We say one thing to the CELAC countries, and then we meet with Chris Dodd, and the tone is very different. So we have this foreign policy that is difficult to understand sometimes. So yeah, those are a few of the ideas that I wanted to give you to sort of start a conversation.
No, they're very good ideas. Just for some of our listeners who may not know what CELAC is, could you explain?
So the CELAC are basically the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, the Commission of Countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, and we held our own sort of summit a few days ago before the Summit of the Americas, which I think it was very proper. And this was part of this conversation. So what is the president of the CELAC is going to do? Is he going to not go like most of the countries of the region decided to do? I believe it will have been the right move, because if the majority of the countries of the Caribbean made a decision, the president of the CELAC should have respected that. But again, domestically, we are in a different situation. We have an 80% inflation annually, not 18, 80. And we have this agreement with the International Monetary Fund that goes back and forth all the time, because it seems that, and this is a personal opinion, it seems that our economic ministry negotiates with the YMF, and then the internal struggle of the ruling party sends mixed messages. So he has to go back, and we have the vice president of Argentina saying one thing, the president saying another thing. So that whole thing creates a lot of confusion in terms of what is the economic policy of the country. And the foreign policy of the country is not exactly very clear on most issues, because we say one thing and then information comes in news outlets that the president or the vice president said, gave an opposite view of whatever issue. So that creates a lot of confusion in order to get anything done. So.
Well, I think the best thing is for Americans to study abroad in Argentina, so they can learn and experience these things. No, I think these are very good points. I think I don't even know how many Americans are really paying attention to the Summit of the Americas, really. I have to really look for it on the news media here.
Yes.
And I think if we look at it compared to all the countries in Latin America and the United States, I think in every country, in Latin America, all those countries, the people there are paying attention to the Summit of the Americas, whereas in the United States, people don't. They're not worried. They don't. They focus more on the Amber Heard, Johnny Depp trial, things like that. So it's displaced priorities really from our end.
Yeah, and one last thing is that I feel like, again, the region had a very clear idea of what they wanted to discuss in the summit after 2018, where there was no dialogue. And this was a new opportunity. We're talking to a new administration, and then this happened. But I think it was kind of, and again, this is a personal opinion. I hope no one gets offended, but it seems like the Biden administration put itself on sort of like a dead-end situation. It's a lose-lose situation for the Biden administration, because it was an unnecessary diplomatic scenario that they set up. It seems like, like I was saying at the beginning of this long speech, we know that Latin America is not a priority on a foreign policy agenda with urgent and pressing issues. We know that there's Ukraine, Russia, NATO, China, cyber terrorism, trade war, alliances in Asia, the Middle East, Taiwan, all these things that are happening all the time. But that doesn't mean that the region is not important, obviously. And it's a battlefield for the United States and China, and we sort of know that too. So, but at the same time, it seems like with this decision that the United States made, and what does it mean now? Because if the United States goes back in its decision, that looks bad, and it fits, the Republican Party in a way. But if it doesn't go back, the countries won't go, or half the countries will go, and the summit is happening anyway. But at the end of the day, if most presidents don't go to the United States, and it's not the United States, it's again going to look good, to look bad, sorry. So it seems like it's going to be a loose situation for the Biden administration, because people like Marco Rubio and the Republican Party are going to say this is another example that the Biden administration cannot handle its own foreign policy in its, I hate this expression, but in its own backyard. So can we expect that he can handle other situations worldwide? So that ends up just being when the midterm elections are coming up, and I'm pretty sure that another border crisis is going to show up in the news pretty soon because of this situation, because of the failure of this 2022 summit. And finally, I would like to point out that Latin America doesn't look to Washington to define its own political foreign policy anymore, or even its own ideological wars anymore. Something that Argentina, for example, is very proud of is had been adopted the third position back in the 1950s. You know, we are not capitalists, we're not communists, this is the third position. And I feel like we are going back to that, and the region is going back to that. And that we wanted to assert that Latin American and Caribbean countries are deciding their own next steps regarding these countries of the region, regarding Venezuela, regarding Nicaragua, regarding Cuba. Those positions may be controversial again, but we are going to decide in each and every case what we want to do. Because if this is what you want for a country like Ukraine to decide how they want their alliances to be, we feel that we have the same right to decide who we want to make an alliance with and which is the bloc that we want to belong to. And that cannot be an argument that is useful for a country and not for other countries. And I feel like this is something that the State Department needs to understand and try to act accordingly.
I think a lot of people would agree with you about the State Department acting accordingly, because there's an expression, people talk through their hat. Biden, or the State Department is critical of Cuba, for example, with not giving voice to political prisoners. But then Biden is planning on visiting Saudi Arabia, and they are hardly the paragon of virtue. They have immense human rights abuses there. So you are completely right. The State Department is not consistent in terms of its approach. Certainly not to Latin America, not at all, and especially not to Cuba. And I just don't. I mean, I think even if we've seen this with different presidents, the State Department still has the same hard line with Cuba, and it seems like almost the same indifference towards Latin America in general, with the Summit of the Americas. So I think what
or I think the last 4 years have been very revealing, like the approach of the U.S. administration to Orban in Hungary.
Right. Yeah.
And I feel like the region is just not buying the argument anymore, because it's like, this is not about whatever it is that you're saying. It's not about that. This is about something else. And again, I feel like the example of Ukraine is very proper. It's like, this is about a country that wants to choose their own alliances and step away from one superpower and get closer to NATO. We agree with that, but we have the same right. If Venezuela wants to be closer to whoever they want to, they should decide, because it's I cannot say that word. It's a soberania thing. I cannot say that word in English.
Sovereignty. That's fine.
Sovereignty. It's such a hard word. But yeah, again, I feel like we are the argument thing is that it's just not. It's not working anymore. So the State Department needs to change the approach, that go back to dialogue. And the thing is that I'm sure that if the State Department had consulted with countries of the region before making such an announcement, I don't know if the outcome would have been the same, but the message would have been different.
Right.
There was a consultation. I don't know, but I feel like it would have been a different. The countries may or may not would have aligned with the U.S. and the perception would have been different. But they decided to do this on their own because they are like the host country. But that is not how the summit works. So I don't know. I feel like the State Department needs to change the approach to the region, and one way will be having advisors that were in the region at one point or the other, or that even speak Spanish.
That would be a big help. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because otherwise it's going to be the same old 40-year-old policies that will not work anymore.
Yeah, we've seen that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I think Lopez Obrador already said that he's not going. I mean, it's one day away that he should travel. So he said he's not going. Fernandez, the president of Argentina, it is going as the spokesperson of, I'm afraid of what he could say. I'm going to apologize in advance for all the Argentinian people.
Well, who knows? Maybe he will do something good. We'll see. Maybe he'll say something that needs to be said and something that the United States needs to hear.
I hope he doesn't go rogue. Every time he goes rogue, something doesn't, but hopefully there's been discussions about what he's going to say and he's going to stay on point.
Well, we'll see. Well, Vale, I think that's it for me. Do you have any final thoughts or final comments?
No, again, I just wanted to thank you for giving the Latin American perspective a voice in English, which is something very, very rare. And I hope, again, this starts a conversation that we can pick up any other time.
Well, we will do this again, and we will certainly invite you back again, Vale, to talk again.
I would love to.
Great observations, and we'll share it, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye, Vale.